Back at it again with the dark green suit, and we're here to talk about some more Asylum ripoff movies. Back for round two, let's go. As a quick refresher, last year I did a movie marathon video talking about a bunch of movies from the Asylum. Obviously, they're a company that specializes on cheap creature feature movies or crappy cash-in movies to try and bank off of recently released movies to try and trick dads and moms and grandparents across the US. Got stuff like Transmorphers, Sunday School Musical, The Day the Earth Stopped, I Am Omega, and other crap like that. So I figured, well, there's a bunch of other movies that I didn't talk about from the Asylum, some of which I had seen before and other ones I finally got around to watching. I probably heard of some of them before, but I never got around to seeing them until now. This time I have a total of 3 pages worth of notes for all 8 movies that I watched. So I'm gonna be relying on these because when you watch 8 movies for one video, a lot of it starts to blur together. The first movie up, we got one that I've seen many a times. Halloween Night, their attempt at cashing in on the 2007 Rob Zombie Halloween remake. The plot of this movie is basically no different than the Rob Zombie movie, except the killer in it isn't Michael Myers, it's a guy in a really generic-looking leather-bound mask. But just like in the 2007 Rob Zombie Halloween remake, you see the killer's origin story, and it had a tragic childhood, except unlike that movie where we see Michael Myers was just part of some white trash family, had an abusive alcoholic father, his sister was mean to him, his mom was a stripper. This movie you have it that his mom was raped and his father was killed by a bunch of maniacs, and he ended up bumping into a pipe and it burned his face horribly. And jump forward years later, he's been in a mental institution, and he eventually ends up escaping. He kills somebody at a truck stop bathroom, and then he attacks a bunch of dumb teenagers on Halloween, except in that movie and the original Halloween, it's of course a bunch of people who are babysitting. Here, it's a bunch of dumb young people at a party. And well, I guess one key similarity to Rob Zombie movies is that some of the people are ungodly annoying, and you kind of want the killer to get them. The main guy in this movie, his name's David. This guy, every single line delivery he gives, he seems like he actively doesn't know what his lines are. He seems like he's making them up as he goes, just like I am right now.
So happy you're here. It's just rock. You remember that stereo system that I was gonna get from you?
Yeah, I got it.
I need that shit.
Now?
Yeah, the stereo upstairs is giving me a problem. I was gonna take some.
There's a bunch of other characters in the movie, but really, they're not interesting at all. I mean, you got love interest, Shannon is her name, and I only know that because of a scene we're gonna get to later. But otherwise, everyone in this movie is just either incredibly unlikable or uninteresting, and you don't really care if the killer gets them. You establish that there's some cops trying to look out for the killer, whose name's not Michael Myers, obviously. In this version, his name is Chris. They couldn't even think of a name that was kind of similar to Michael Myers. But yeah, there's some cop characters, and the first scene with the cops, first of all, I gotta point out, the cop car in this movie is so fake, it almost rivals the fake cop car from Reverend I'm Available.
Oh fuck! They're searching trunks. Put that in the back.
Come on.
But more importantly, the editing, which I'm going to harp on for a majority of this section talking about this movie, Halloween Night, the editing in this movie is so fucked up, and this is one of the first key examples of it. This scene where the cop pulls over these 2 characters to like ask them where they're going and if they've seen anyone that looks suspicious in the area, the way the scene is edited, it looks like the cop actually switches actor.
All these weapons aren't legal in this state.
Hey, officer, how you doing?
That's just the beginning of the bad editing. Eventually, later on in the movie, the killer, Chris, he ends up getting to the party. He starts killing people left and right. Ultimately, it comes down to David, main guy, who can't act, and has some of the most unintentionally funny voice cracks in the film.
Shannon!
But once Chris shows up and starts killing everybody, here's where we get some more terrible-ass editing, because, okay, you have this one guy who's dressed up in a jester suit, and he looks like that guy from that one meme, Carl the Cuck. He looks like that guy. But the way he gets killed, Chris takes like a sword and then like rams it through his head. But look at how it's edited. You saw that, right? That's actually how it's presented in the movie. It's just a static shot, because I can only assume they couldn't find a way to actually have an authentic looking sword go from the back of someone's head to popping out their front. Chris goes after Shannon, and David, our main guy, goes after Chris. A bunch of other members of their friend group end up getting killed, and we get the amazing line delivery of him going, "Shannon!"
Oh shit, Shannon!
Reminded me of another bad horror movie I reviewed once, The Bye-Bye Man. There's a scene where a guy's looking for his daughter, and he just goes, "Alice!" But I can't forget to bring up the best line in the movie. The best line is very early on. It's when David is calling one of his friends who's coming to the party, and the guy ends the phone conversation by saying he has to take a shit.
They fucking blocked the roads, man. The police are everywhere. Somebody escaped from a prison or something.
Fucking sweet. I gotta take a shit. I'll see you later.
Best line in the entire movie. Ultimately, they end up getting the drop on Chris. Chris is killed. There's a cop that shows up the next morning, and he's talking to Shannon about, oh, things are going to be okay. And the cop seriously looks like Post Malone. He really does look like him, pre-face tats and everything. But then, it seems like someone in a body bag is getting up, so Shannon shoots him, thinking that it's the killer. It turns out it was actually David, and Chris got away. After you see that David was shot instead of the killer, Shannon looks down at him, and the camera is positioned looking up at her. And for whatever reason, there's just this random cut to black, and the audio cuts off for a second.
Whoa, what the hell was that?
Yeah, you saw that too.
Where it was like
weird.
where it was like a pop.
It was like a very brief flash of black screen and nothing.
Yeah.
It cuts back.
It's Chris, the serial killer. He's running around on a bunch of back roads, and to cover up his face, he has a paper plate with a face drawn on it that's upside down. I would hope to God that was unintentional, because that would just make that just a little funnier. But he ends up getting picked up by some redneck guy, and then they drive off into the distance. And then the credits...
That's cropping for you right there.
I guess not.
Jesus fuck.
Oh my god.
These horrible editing mistakes were left in the movie. The movie seriously doesn't feel finished. To add to that with the dialogue that sounds like they were making it up as they go from the main guy, and the music during the opening sounds like stock music. It sounds like something you get from Kevin MacLeod. The entire movie feels like a work print. It doesn't feel like a finished movie. Granted, it's the Asylum, and I don't really expect much from them, but even still, this is probably one of the sloppiest things they've ever put together. Done talking about Halloween Night. Moving on to the next one. American Warships. Their ripoff of that 2012 Michael Bay produced Battleship movie. So the first thing I have written in my notes is Carl Weathers and Mario Van Peebles are in this movie. And yeah, I mean, they technically are. Mario Van Peebles is the main guy in it. And Carl Weathers, the late great Carl Weathers, he's in the movie for 5 minutes. It feels like they got him to film for a day, and most of his scenes are in an office room.
Alert the 8th Fighter Wing at Kunsan Air Base. Let's get an AWACS flight with escort. Find out what the hell's going on over there.
I also gotta point out, the director's name is Thunder Levin. That is awesome. Should have gone back and checked this, but I really hope that that guy directed their Thor ripoff, Almighty Thor, because that'd be so perfect, right? Almighty Thor, God of Lightning, Thunder Levin. It's too perfect to pass up. Just like Halloween Night, this is based on a movie that I think I've only seen once, a very long time ago, and I remember not liking it. But somehow or other, the Asylum managed to make a movie that's even worse. At least in terms of its production, at least with the shitty Michael Bay Transformers and, that movie, Battleship, at least the effects were good. That's the one thing I could always give those movies. As bad as they are, I could say, well, the effects are good in them. Doesn't negate the fact that the rest of the movie sucks, but I could at least give them that much. This movie doesn't even have that. The effects are pretty bad, and there's one scene in particular I'm going to highlight a little bit later. Otherwise, the movie begins, and it has this like real 80s feel to it, because you have it that there's this like old fart Navy ship member. He's like I think a colonel or some kind of higher up, and Mario Van Peebles is like one of the main guys in it, and they're talking to each other, and the old guy's talking about like, oh yeah, things are so much different in the Navy compared to when I was here, and then you see two hot chicks' asses.
Welcome aboard, Admiral.
Thank you, Lieutenant. Ladies first. My God, the Navy's changed.
Plot gets going as there's a bunch of crashes that are taking out a bunch of jet planes and later a military base in Korea. And as the movie progresses, like there's a lot of tension between nations, because they say that, oh, the Koreans think that it was a bombing planned by the Chinese. And, well, there's a scene where the characters are talking and they're talking about how, oh, well, you know, the Koreans rely on the Chinese for everything, including productions of their military equipment.
Even if the Koreans had a weapon like this, they wouldn't think they'd win an all-out escalation.
But I don't think the North Koreans would have a stealth rowboat if the Chinese didn't design and build it for them.
And then, of course, the Americans have to step in, because then they start getting attacked as well, and they're trying to diffuse the tension between the nations. There's a scene very early on where you see, like, Korean fighter pilots, and they're flying across the seas.
Command Control, Letter 1, we are fit wet. No sign up. Wait. Possible surface targeted. Red alert, Rivigan missile locked onto us. Letter 2, go evasive.
Either have them speak Korean and put the subtitles there, or have them speak English so that the audience can understand them. There's no reason to have both of those at the same time. All that's going on. We also have this subplot involving Mario Van Peebles and one of the women who is working in the Navy. Her name's Caroline, and they're talking about turning this old Navy warship into part of a museum for like military and naval history. But the old fart guy from the beginning is like, you know, oh no, we're gonna keep this thing running. Even though they keep bringing up that the technology on this thing is dated. Like the lady says that they can probably figure out what's going on if they have a VHS tape.
I always just got plain old VHS. If I could just get my hands on a working deck, analyze the video of the ship before it disappeared, maybe I could get you some answers.
Eventually the US start to look into all this, and well, this results in one of the worst fucking effects. Even compared to the shitty explosions you got going on, the shitty alien CG effects, you have a scene where it's supposed to be nighttime, and you have some Americans on what's supposed to be like a speedboat, and they have like scuba gear on, but it's clearly three guys in scuba suits standing against a black backdrop, and then they're just like standing and like kind of shimmying in place, and then they put really shitty like wave splashing effects at the bottom of the screen in After Effects.
Gotta be some kind of high energy power source leaking out of the seals of a hatch. Maybe it's nuclear power.
It is so fucking horrible looking, I swear. Because eventually they get out to sea, they find out that it was aliens, and that was what was, you know, attacking the US's fighter jets and the Korean military bases and the Chinese military bases. So the third act of the movie becomes one big fight scene between, you know, it's supposed to be the US and the alien ship, which ends up rising out of the water, and they start taking it on. Oh, and of course, as this whole third act climax is going on, you have Mario Van Peebles straight up say the line, "Nobody sinks my battleship."
They're not gonna sink my battleship.
Maybe that would make more sense if the movie was called American Battleship, but it's called American Warships, because knowing the Asylum, they probably didn't want to get sued. But still, the fact they even put that in there, it's like, damn it, Mario Van Peebles is a trooper, because he went out of his way and he's like, I'm going to say this fucking line. And I'm going to go full Oscar mode on it, damn it. Whatever. The movie ends with them taking out the aliens. The tension between nations is diffused. And Mario Van Peebles and Carolina, they get together and they do end up converting the warship into a part of a military museum. So, hooray. Oh god, this one was next. Okay, so we got Atlantic Rim, their attempt at cashing in on Pacific Rim. This movie is essentially, hey mom, can we watch Pacific Rim? Don't we have Pacific Rim at home? and this movie is the Pacific Rim at home. In other words, it's basically just the same movie with worse effects, worse acting, and a ton of unintentional hilarity. So right away, the movie starts on an oil rig, and of course there's a giant oil spill that ends up awakening a giant monster that's attacking, and eventually the US military is going to have to send in these giant robot mechs piloted by experts to try and stop them, and then we're going to have a giant kaiju-style fight through a city, or something to that effect. But first of all, I gotta point out, this scene has another reoccurring trope that pops up in not just this one, but a couple other Asylum movies we're going to get to later. The audio quality is so shitty.
I need to know, was this an accident?
Of course this was an accident. That was a $15 million machine down there.
Once the monster is released and the US military ends up hearing about this, we cut over and, well, the commander they got in this movie is played by Graham Greene, which in my notes I wrote, well, I guess this is still a step up compared to being in North. At least this movie didn't have him have to whistle the fucking Andy Griffith theme.
What the hell do you mean we lost another oil rig?
Sir, I know as crazy as this sounds, but we cross-checked this with NOAA and NASA, and we check the Doppler ratings every 30 seconds, sir.
Take that damn thing away.
So yeah, Graham Greene is supposed to be this old military captain, and he has this awesome team that know how to operate giant robot mechs, so they're going to send them out to the ocean so that they can go underwater, like down to like the Earth's core, to try and figure out what's going on and see these monsters and possibly stop them before things escalate. And well, okay, I just want to highlight right away one of the guys that's in the scene, and he's going to become a major character in the movie. I forget his name. I think it was Simon. I didn't write it down. But his character is so obviously going to be a bad guy because he has an eye patch.
You do understand that there's a big difference between what goes on in the simulator and what takes place in reality, correct?
As for the three main pilots of these robot mechs, you got this one blonde woman, you have Jim, who honestly was probably the best character in the movie, but you also got the main guy, Red, who is supposed to be the character who has a giant character flaw, and you want to see him get a redemption arc, because they established that he had some kind of big falling out, he's like a recluse, he wants to play by his own rules, and he eventually left their sector, and now he's going out drinking and being an ass. And at first he doesn't want to join them, but eventually he decides he's going to, because there's a little bit of a love triangle going on between our main characters.
See you on the box, bitches.
You good?
Yeah, you?
I'm good. You sure?
Yeah, I'm fine.
They find Red while he's drinking during Mardi Gras, and every time they show scenes of Mardi Gras, it looked like what Red Letter Media call, shooting the rodeo, where it's like, oh, hey, there's a thing going on in town. Let's just film it, and then we can, work elements of the plot around it. And that's what it feels like. They film some Mardi Gras, and then you have it that, like, he steps away, and they're in the middle of, like, an alley that's supposed to be, like, off to the side while Mardi Gras is going on. They convince Red to come back to them because Red is supposed to be a master expert of these like robot mechs, which is going to be incredibly contradictory later. But for now, they all suit up, they go under the water, they come across the monster. Main bad guy with eye patch, Simon I think was his name, he disables two of the other robots, but Red is able to go up to land before the monster does, and he warns a bunch of people on a beach to get out of there. And of course the dumb people are like, whoa, giant robot!
Listen to me. You are in great danger. This is a U.S. government-issued mechanized robot. You need to evacuate the beach now.
And then the monster shows up, and then that's when people get the hell out of there. Then there's a big fight scene, and he shoots a laser at the monster, but misses, and it hits a building. I mean, I know the guy is drunk, and I know he's probably a little out of practice, but at that point I was like, shit, dude, the robots do more damage in this movie than the monsters do. What the hell? And that gets him in trouble with the military sector they're a part of, because there's a bunch of people who are dead in the streets, and they're like, all right, Red, you cost a bunch of people their lives. You're coming with us. We're going to put you in confinement. And he goes with them.
When the clock strikes 12, I'm going to put your ass back in the brig.
Oh, man, but I thought we bonded over this stuff, you know? That hurts me.
You broke every rule today.
But before they eventually defeat the monster, you establish one thing about Jim, aside from the fact that he also has feelings for the main girl in it. But there's a part where they're trying to save people in the town, they're trying to evacuate people, and Jim runs into a burning building, and he saves a little girl, and it was at that point I was like, why isn't this guy the main character? It's like, shit, goes in and saves a kid from a burning building? I want to follow this guy instead, not this red dude.
Close your eyes. Keep your eyes closed. I was waiting for you.
But after the monster is defeated and Red is taken away, shock of shocks, turns out there's another monster egg that ends up hatching and it starts attacking a nearby town once again. So now our two main characters have to break Red out of there so that way they can all suit up in the mech suits and defeat this monster too. So the third act climax of the movie is they go to New York because that's the city that the monster is attacking. And all the while, Graham Greene ends up finding out that Simon, guy with eye patch, is up to no good and he just wants to drop a bunch of nukes. He's kind of like that one sergeant in Mars's Attacks, where he's just like, it's like, let's nuke the bastards, let's nuke everything.
General Banning is ready to nuke these things now.
Well, I'll talk to General Banning. You can't just throw down a nuke on Manhattan and pretend it's over. It's not.
Mech suits, they have like special weapons built in. It really looked like something out of a crappy fighting game from the 2000s. It's like, you know, oh, this one has sword, this one has stick, this one has laser arms or whatever. It's like, it was like, it looked like a character roster from a shitty video game. And again, that was probably because of the shitty CGI. Then again, it's an Asylum movie, so I guess that goes without saying, right? Guess what? The movie ends very stupidly. They take the monster, and using their giant robot mech suits, they launch it up into space, and then they redirect nukes to fly into space and blow up the monster. And it actually works. Oh my god. Alright, next movie.
On a train.
With the exception of Pacific Rim, at least the first one, I really liked the first Pacific Rim. That was a great summer blockbuster, great throwback to old kaiju movies. That movie was a lot of fun. That movie was cool. All the other movies that these movies are ripping off that I've talked about so far, they're not very good. Snakes on a Plane, which this movie is ripping off, that's a movie that's bad, but it's entertainingly bad. Sort of like the first Sharknado. The fact that everyone's treating the stupid shit in the movie so seriously, that's what makes it fun. Compared to what the Asylum would eventually do with stuff like the Sharknado sequels, where it felt like they were milking a joke that got old fast. As for Snakes on a Train, it doesn't really try to do the same kind of formula. I mean, yeah, obviously, the title is supposed to be a play off of, oh, it's Snakes on a Train instead of Snakes on a Plane. But the plot is very, very different. The movie begins with a guy who's carrying a woman across the border from Mexico to the US, and they're approached by a redneck guy, and the lady is very sick, and it seems like she's spitting up a lot, but she ends up spitting up a snake, which then attacks the redneck. So this main guy who's carrying her and trying to take care of her, they're trying to get away, and they end up getting onto a train filled with a bunch of lookalikes. We don't have anybody like Carl Weathers or Mario Van Peebles or anyone where it's like, oh, hey, yeah, these people probably had careers at some point. The entire movie looked like you're at a convention for shitty lookalikes. Like, you have people that look like a knockoff Denise Richards, a guy who looks like a knockoff Vin Diesel, a guy who kind of looks like Morgan Spurlock with a handlebar mustache, like a guy who kind of looks like Dax Shepard. It just looks like a bunch of people who are trying to look like famous people on the Hollywood Strip. It's like 8 people on the train, and each of them have subplots that come and go. Like, you have this sleazy, fat business guy who's trying to hook up with this one woman who's there with her kids, and her husband is like a drunk and he's passed out. And, well, okay, the knockoff Dax Shepard and eventually the knockoff Vin Diesel end up getting into a fight with the main guy who's with the woman in the back. And so there's this big extended fight scene. A couple of other guys who are like their goons, essentially. He ends up tying them up and he blows a bunch of green shit into their face. All the while, she keeps spitting up snakes. And for the first half of the movie, I was like, are they ever going to explain this? And they do. They eventually do. And like you'd expect from an Asylum movie, it's incredibly stupid. She's spitting up snakes because her family, who are very religious, cursed her because she wanted to run away and marry the guy who's with her instead of marrying some guy that they picked out for her. So because she ran away and she broke her family's wishes, they put a curse on her. And not only is she spitting up snakes, but eventually she turns into a giant snake woman. And, well, this is the movie's attempt at a third act because, well, one of the things I was not expecting for them to do was the little girl who's with the drunk dad and the slutty mom who's trying to get with the sleazy business guy or whatever. That little girl ends up getting eaten. I was not expecting that at all. I was not expecting child death in a shitty Asylum ripoff. Holy shit. But yeah, she ends up turning into a giant snake woman, and then she grows even bigger and turns into a giant snake. And the movie has the most batshit crazy ending of all time out of all these Asylum movies we're doing for this. This one ends with the snake swallowing the train. All the main characters who are still alive at this point end up jumping off of the train, and they survive. And then you're probably wondering, well, how did they get rid of the giant snake then? The giant snake that has swallowed the train is then swept away in a giant tornado. Holy shit. Other than that, this movie has a lot of the same problems you'd expect from an Asylum movie. The bad acting, the bad editing. There's this weird thing where all throughout the movie they keep reusing like a knockoff Inception sound. Every chance they got, they did the boom, like from the Inception trailer. Oh, but I do have in my notes, there is one insanely awful but really funny line.
You freak. Your mother's cunt smells like carpet cleaner.
It happens in the movie. After that, we have 666 The Child, which this is the first note that I wrote down. The title reminds me of this running joke that I used to have with a bunch of friends, where whenever they were talking about that show, Chris Angel Mind Freak, they would always refer to him as Hot Topic the Man or Hot Topic the Person. So every time I saw the title for this movie written down, 666 The Child, I just kept thinking of that. Hot Topic the Person. This movie is a ripoff of the Omen remake from, I think, 2005 or 2006. It was definitely one of those cases where they released it either a week before the movie came out or they released it a year before the movie came out, and they just made the whole movie based on the trailer. Now, granted, it's been a while since I've seen The Omen. I remember the original, but I don't really remember the remake. I think I saw it once and forgot about it. But otherwise, this movie is like beat for beat the same thing as The Omen. Even down to the main character's name being similar. Instead of Damien, it's Donald.
He needs a home.
Who does?
Donald.
Essentially the same characters are there. Orphan child who's pure evil, has a birthmark that looks like 666. That's in the movie. They also incorporate that from The Omen. Family that adopts him that don't really know he's evil at first. A bunch of people who are connected to the church who are aware that the kid is evil. Every single plot beat that I could think of from the original Omen is basically done in this movie. You know what though? This movie, compared to some of the other ones, this is actually one of the better Asylum movies. I mean, that's not saying much, and I'm not saying that this is a masterpiece by any means, but honestly, aside from some wooden acting here and there, this actually wasn't that terrible. And granted, yeah, the movie does pretty much do the exact same things that The Omen already did way better, but honestly, as a movie itself, like, if you were to watch this on TV, it's a decent little thriller that, has a similar premise. But, yeah, I mean, if you caught this movie on TV and, you weren't really paying the best of attention, it's not terrible. I mean, even the acting, while not perfect, it's actually some of the best acting I've seen in an Asylum movie. I can't believe I'm saying that, but yeah, it's true. The acting in this, nothing great, but surprisingly decent for Asylum. I'm actually kind of surprised I don't have that much to say about this one. Like, I was watching the movie, I was generally invested. I didn't think it was one of the worst things ever made. I thought the poster and the title were bad, but honestly, classic example of can't judge a book by its cover. This wasn't that bad. So next up we got a... oh, great. We got 100 million BC.
100 million BC.
From the title, it's supposed to be a ripoff of 10,000 BC. But much like other Asylum movies I've talked about before, like Transmorphers, this is honestly less of a ripoff of that movie, and it feels more like a ripoff of the 1998 Godzilla or Jurassic Park Lost World, the second Jurassic Park movie, and then sprinkle in a little bit of like Philadelphia effect or, you know, any kind of time travel plot, and you basically have this movie. The big name that they were able to get for this movie is Michael Gross from the Tremors movies, and he plays an older gentleman.
The oxygen levels during the Cretaceous period are half of what they are today. So we're also taking Diamox and altitude sickness medicine to help us breathe.
He's part of a military program, and a bunch of people that he was close with end up getting sucked back in time, and now they're trapped in prehistoric times. So now he, years later, gathers up a whole new team so that they can hopefully get this time machine working, because he's been working on it for years. But he wants to use this time machine he was working on to send them back so that hopefully they can find any survivors from his old group and bring them back to the present. Compare that to 10,000 BC, which is generally about a group of cavemen that end up leaving their tribe and end up discovering like ancient Egypt, and they go to war with them. This movie is nothing like that. And of course, like any other schlocky B movie, these people end up in prehistoric times and they slowly get picked off one by one by a bunch of shitty clip art dinosaurs.
Jesus Christ, Burke, we're not gonna...
I will give them credit, every once in a while they do have a practical effect. It's not a very good looking one, it's terrible, but the fact that they have a shitty dinosaur puppet of like a raptor that occasionally just like... every once in a while, you know what? That actually kind of made the movie a little bit more interesting to watch. As always, the acting is very stilted, the dinosaur effects are very terrible. I don't think I've seen shitty dinosaur effects this bad since like, I don't know, Time Machine I found at a yard sale. It really looked that bad. But the movie started to pick up a little bit of steam because by the third act, they end up bringing themselves back to the present, and they also bring back a T-Rex, which then terrorizes a town, and of course they have to stop it. This is what I was talking about in that it feels like a ripoff of Jurassic Park 2, The Lost World, and a little bit of that Godzilla 98 remake. Like even the cover for it, if you look up the poster for the movie, it looks like that. They do it so early in the movie that a lot of it becomes incredibly repetitive. Like, not only is it repetitive, you have a bunch of people running around in the woods because that's typically what they could get away with in Asylum movies. They're more than likely filming these movies without permits. It's that old Ed Wood method. But, you know, most of the time when they're supposed to be in prehistoric times, they're just running around in a wooded area. In the third act of the movie, when this dinosaur is loose in the city, they're, I don't know, in Southeast LA, I guess, I don't know. And they're running around the same city block over and over and over again, and the actors start to feel incredibly bored with their own material. They start to sound like they're sleepy. But one thing I found interesting, there are several points where you could see just people like stumbling around in the background. They just like look like just random people who were actually on the street and were like, what the hell's going on over there?
All right, you son of a bitch.
You can actually see that they blocked off the roads, and I can only assume they probably asked like a police officer or someone they knew, like, hey, is it okay if we block off the streets? We're trying to film a movie here. I don't know. That's all I could assume, because there are so many times where it's like, wait, why are the roads blocked off? And then they try to like work around that. It's like, oh yeah, we're using these to block off the dinosaur. As if just everyday roadblocks are going to stop a fucking T-Rex running around. Honestly, the fact that this movie wasn't just a straightforward ripoff of 10,000 BC was both a curse and a blessing. On one hand, I kind of like the fact that it wasn't just a blatant copy of that, because that movie was also not very good. At the same time, it did make this movie a little bit more interesting in that, okay, it's just a time travel story about people going back to try and save people in the past. and then they end up bringing a dinosaur back, and then they have to get rid of that before it hurts people. At least it was a basic setup, and they stuck with it, as boring as it got after a while. Okay, we have 2 movies left, and I wrote a lot for this next one. We have Titanic II. So right away, I just want to preface that this is not the only Titanic movie that the Asylum have done. They also did a movie called Titanic 666. I've not seen that. All I saw was the trailer for it. It looked stupid. It sounded stupid. Not talking about that. We're talking about this stupid movie. This movie came out in like the late 2000s. I don't know why they decided to rip off the James Cameron Titanic movie, other than there was probably a resurgence for interest in the Titanic at the time. I think there was like a documentary that came out, so they wanted to capitalize on that. So basically what they did was it feels like they tried taking the James Cameron Titanic and making it into a schlocky Asylum style action movie. Because there's just a bunch of scenes where it's like you have the obvious like bad action movie shots, and you know the climax of the movie plays out like an action movie, but we gotta start from the beginning. It's like Titanic, you know, it takes place on the titular boat. You establish right away that there are glaciers that are melting, and obviously there's going to be an iceberg that the ship's going to end up hitting, but that's going to happen a little bit later in the movie. We establish main characters. We have 2 girls and 1 guy. And the guy is just made to be like the coolest fucking dude. And then I found out he was played by the director. And I'm like, this guy clearly was trying to live out some kind of power fantasy. He wanted to be the coolest fucking guy in the room. The 2 girls ends up hooking up with this guy. They fall in love with each other. But then a glacier bursts against the Titanic and it starts to sink. And well, first of all, it takes forever for them to get the Titanic out of port. On top of that, when it's not just when you don't have shitty effects of the boat and some fighter jets as well. The entire ship, whenever they have shots of it from the port, like when it's parked at the harbor, it's clearly the Queen Mary. It's not the Titanic. They were not fooling anybody with that. On top of that, every once in a while you keep cutting back to people in the Antarctic and they're discovering that the polar ice caps are melting, and you get some laughably bad effects like this. Oh, yeah. You have the 3 main characters, and you also have this guy who's constantly angry and is constantly trying to fight people for no reason other than he's probably not thinking rationally and he's just going berserk.
Well, I'm not leaving this ship without her, Hayden.
Okay, I'm going with you. It's all your fault!
What's wrong with you? Get off of him!
But you have everybody scurrying to get off the boat as soon as possible, but out of nowhere they say, oh no, people are starting to get into the life rafts. The life rafts are actually death traps.
We're going down on the starboard side, 30 degrees west.
Okay, Captain, you need to get your people out of the lifeboats.
Half the lifeboat ramps were crushed on impact.
The lifeboats are death traps.
Not only is that confusing, but the ship is going down. The ship is filling with water, and you have the main characters trying to get into elevators every other chance they get. And it's like, why?
Let me in!
I know it sucks to take the stairs every once in a while, but if your ship is sinking, it's probably more efficient to take the stairs than the elevator. You're more than likely to get stuck in there or drown or die faster. People who were studying the glaciers melting earlier, they're flying around in a helicopter trying to help the people on the boat because they end up getting in contact with them. But ultimately, when it comes down to our 3 main characters, they end up getting to a certain part of the ship where there's scuba equipment. And, well, there's only 1 tank and 1 suit. Main guy ends up dying. He sacrifices himself so that main girl can take the scuba equipment and get out of there. There's some people in the helicopter who end up dying. I think they end up falling and they end up getting swept away into the giant waves and the glaciers and whatnot. But they end up saving the 2 main girls. And then they get the body of the main guy, and even though main girl tries to bring him back with some CPR. He still doesn't make it. The movie ends with the main guy dying.
Hey, I promise me. Come back.
Kind of like the Cameron movie, except this one feels like a fucking schlocky action movie made for Sci-Fi Channel. People could say what they want about the James Cameron Titanic movie and how it fucked around with history and whatnot. At least it wasn't Titanic II, and at least it wasn't shitty animated movies that had rapping dogs and rapping sharks. But before we move on to the last movie, I just gotta bring this up. One of the writers of Titanic II went on to write for a shitty, big budget found footage movie called Chernobyl Diaries.
They got him! I'm not leaving without my brother! Please help us!
It's not a good movie, but just the fact that I found out it was the guy who wrote Titanic II that put that piece of shit together, that just blew my mind. How do you go from low budget straight to DVD shit like Titanic II, and then you end up becoming the creative force behind a shitty big budget found footage movie, working alongside some of the people that worked on Paranormal Activity? How do you do that? Lastly, there's really not a whole lot to say about this one. I'm surprised I didn't have more to say about this, but final movie of the night, H.G. Wells' War of the Worlds. This was one of 3 War of the Worlds movies that came out in 2005. Clearly, 2 of them were aping off of the upcoming 2005 remake of War of the Worlds with Tom Cruise that Steven Spielberg had a hand in doing. What's really funny is 2 of them went straight to video. One of them is like 3 hours long, and as far as I can tell was closer to the original book, which took place in like the 17th century, 18th century. And then you have giant Martian warships showing up and killing everybody and trying to take over the planet. But this one is not like that. This one, it's about a standard hour-and-a-half long, I'd say. And, well, it takes place in contemporary modern time, 2005, when the movie came out. And honestly, like, I really wish there was more to say, because otherwise this movie is just a generic garden variety alien invasion movie. The only real interesting thing was, okay, the Martian warships in this, they look like giant robot crabs. In the grand Asylum tradition of ripping off as much shit as possible, the front cover has the alien, like, Martian warships blowing up the White House, and I'm just like, well, shit, not only are they trying to rip off the 2005 Tom Cruise War of the Worlds, they're also trying to rip off Independence Day with the cover. I feel like even the other one, while it's painfully long, it's, like I said, 3 hours. I think there's a cut that's like 2 hours long, so at least there's a version of it that's 1 hour shorter. I think that one's more interesting because as horrible looking as that one was, with effects that look like they're out of a PS2 game, at least that was trying something different. It was at least trying to be more accurate to the book, and like, oh, you have people dressed in old-fashioned, old-timey outfits and living in log cabins and shit. At least it's something different. It was more interesting, at least visually, especially with how shitty the effects are. It's sad when the Asylum actually has better effects than you. The Asylum's shitty effects are better than the shitty effects in this other 3 hour long version of War of the Worlds. This movie, it's a very generic alien invasion movie. And what's also interesting that I found out is that according to IMDb, this had an alternate title of just being called The Invasion, which I'm pretty sure, I think, yeah, the 2003 Nicole Kidman remake of Invasion of the Body Snatchers was called The Invasion. So wrap your head around that. Oh, and to round things out, this movie actually got a sequel. Yeah, they made a second War of the Worlds because in Grand Asylum fashion, when one of their movies makes a little bit of scratch, they decide, let's try and cash in on our cash-in, so let's make a sequel to it. So yeah, they didn't make a sequel to the 2005 Tom Cruise War of the Worlds movie. Not like it really needed one, it didn't. Asylum went ahead and was like, hey, let's make a sequel to our shitty War of the Worlds movie.
What are you waiting for?
And so to close this video out, like I usually do with the movie marathon videos, I'm going to say which one I thought was the best and which one I thought was the worst. I think the best movies of the night were probably 666 The Child, because despite being an obvious ripoff of The Omen, it actually felt like a decent TV movie. And Atlantic Rim, Atlantic Rim, it's pretty much what I was expecting it to be. It's just the Asylum's attempt at ripping off Pacific Rim. But at least it flowed like a movie compared to other movies like Snakes on a Train and Halloween Night. I thought that those two in particular were probably the more interesting ones. And I guess maybe a close third would be 100 Million BC. That movie is also really stupid, but if you just turn your brain off and it's like, okay, time travel movie involving dinosaurs, then they bring a dinosaur back to the present day, whatever, fuck it, stupid. Let's laugh at how stupid this one is. In terms of the worst, I'm definitely gonna say Halloween Night. That movie, it barely flowed like a movie. The editing in it was amateurish even for the Asylum. I mean, like some of the other movies, they have flaws. Like Snakes on a Train is not very good. American Warships is not very good. War of the Worlds was just kind of generic. But I don't know, Halloween Night's acting out of all of these movies was so shitty. And like all the other movies, it's like, okay, it at least had an actor who you've seen be good in things like movies or TV shows, and they were probably just slumming for a paycheck in these movies. Halloween Night didn't have that. And very close second for worst, probably Titanic II. I mean, even for Asylum, and even as someone who likes the James Cameron Titanic movie, isn't in love with it, but thinks it's a fine movie, even still, this is just a fucking stupid movie. It honestly just felt like someone was like, hey, why don't we take that Titanic movie and make it an action flick? And it's just like, no, thank you. And to end things off, this is probably the last Asylum video that I'm gonna do. I don't know if I'm gonna do any more Asylum movie marathons, or who knows, maybe in the future I'll do like a solo review of just one movie from them every here and there. But I don't know, I feel like Asylum's time in the sun is kind of gone. I mean, you know, Asylum, they were all the rage in the early 2000s and like early 2010s. I think they definitely peaked with Sharknado, and then eventually they milked that into the ground, and you know, the gag got old fast, and I feel like everyone kind of moved on from Asylum after that. They're still around. They're still pumping out trash left and right. They're still doing crappy rip-off movies. They apparently moved on to doing some shitty animated rip-offs as well. I brought that up last time. They did a shitty rip-off Little Mermaid movie that was animated, and it had Dee Wallace and it had Steve Guttenberg in it. And they also did a rip-off of Onward from Disney and Pixar, and then their rip-off had Tom Green in it. But anyway, so yeah, Asylum, they're still going, but honestly, I think people have moved on to companies like Jagged Edge Productions, you know, because they're all the rage with their stupid folklore and public domain horror killer movies as of late, like Winnie the Pooh, Blood and Honey, and they have like a bunch of movies based on like The Leprechaun and Easter Bunny and, you know, Cupid, I think, and like a bunch of other like fairy tale folklore horror movies. I think people are generally moving over to them as the new hotspot for shitty low budget trash. Anyway, yeah, that does it for this video. Look forward to next time. We're going to be doing an anime review, and we're going to be reviewing what many are calling the brain rot anime of the year, My Dear Friend Nokotan. But until then, guys, I'm Adam Sykes of the Blockbuster Show, and we will see you guys in the next video.